All right, welcome to Bet the Edge. I'm Jay Croucher here with Drew Dinsick. As always, we're recording 5.5 minutes into England, Netherlands, which is going on the screen behind me. So if there are any abrupt movements or noises, it's because something has happened in that one, praying for the orange there. But we're going to talk today about Wimbledon, for better or worse. We're going to talk about the NBA Defensive Player of the Year market, which has opened and has stirred waves in the areas that are rocked by those sort of things. And then we're going to close out by talking about the AFC South in the NFL. But how are you, Drew? What's news, mate?
Well, I don't think there's going to be, based on the quality of the English matches we've seen to this point in the tournament, probably not going to be many exciting moments that'll distract us from creating this awesome content. But that I can definitely tell you that this program will be more awesome than Wimbledon, which continues to be absolutely dreadful. And I was, as I say that, big chance, Netherlands. The Wimbledon results this morning were bananas. Not because of like quality, but because of Joker didn't have to play anyone, and Musetti Fritz went 5 sets and was a roller coaster that ultimately has a very exhausted and a million hours on court Lorenzo Musetti heading into what will certainly be an ugly decapitation at the hands of Djokovic in the semifinal number 2. Semifinal number 1 looks fascinating to handicap between Alcaraz and Medvedev, and we'll get into that in a bit. But the women's Wimbledon, my goodness gracious, like my last runner is out. Penko just had absolutely no mental composure in her matchup against Krejcikova, who, by the way, Krejcikova is an interesting character because she bloomed late. Right. She won a French Open in 2021. It was a surprise. No one really saw it coming, but she was playing very good tennis leading into that. And I think just in general, you look at her resume and you're like, how'd she do on grass over her career? Was she any good? Did she have any bright spots? She took off grass from 2017 to 2021, 4 years where she just said, you know what? Not for me. And then she wins Wimbledon. She wins the French Open. She has enough ranking points that she's seated at Wimbledon. So she decides, I'll give it a try. And, to then in a couple of years' time, be able to carry that, little experience into, this type of success on grass is amazing. And like the step up in quality that we've seen from her at this tournament relative to everything else I've seen from her playing this year is just, it's enormous. And so much of the women's side of the draw and the results that you're looking at just feel just wildly random. And I can't put my finger on it. There may be just in general, like a little bit of a strange tactical decision-making between teams because a lot of these women are going back onto clay to compete for Olympic gold. And that's what's causing some of this chaos. I can't tell. But Elena Rybakina now, who comes through cleanly against Svitolina, has faced the softest path to what looks to be a second Wimbledon title that I can remember. I mean, this is like, she's going to be, monstrous favorite in the final against either of these two women in the second semifinal, Vekic or Paolini. Paolini, of course, came through and made it to the French Open finals just 1 month ago. And that was not a very competitive effort, despite being more competitive than I thought it was going to be against Iga in the final. And I think we're in for a little bit of deja vu all over again, where I don't know that she can go toe-to-toe with Rybakina at all in terms of meeting power, but she will give you a spirited effort and give you an entertaining hour on court probably. So, I was against Rybakina at price heading into this tournament just because there were so many questions about illness, fitness, etc. And she's going to just win it with doing nothing, which doesn't feel just and is somewhat frustrating, as you only get 4 of these majors a year to handicap. And this one doesn't feel great. I'll be honest.
Yeah. Well, I missed about 17% of what you said because the Dutch scored an absolute worldie right while you were talking. My man Xavi Simons absolutely belted one into the top corner, so the Dutch lead 1-0. I think on the women's side, the thing is that it's been 2 years now of it just being a clear, I think, delineated top tier where Iga Swiatek, Aryna Sabalenka, and Elena Rybakina, their ceiling is just higher than everyone else consistently. And if Sabalenka is going to withdraw from the tournament and Iga has a melt that she's prone to, then all of a sudden it just really opens up. Now, ideally, you would have someone like Coco Gauff step into the void, or Ostapenko, and it's just broken incredibly well for Rybakina and it's broken just as well for Novak Djokovic on the men's side, which we'll talk to. In terms of the three others on the women's draw, is there anyone who has actual upside to beat Rybakina, short of Rybakina just randomly melting on a given day? Because I watched Kudragova Ostapenko, and I'm still not sure how Kudragova won in straight sets. Like, she didn't look amazing out there.
No.
She just kind of won the high leverage points. It really seemed like she was going to bottle it in the second set, and then just a few points in the tiebreak went her way, but I don't think she really has the upside. There's been a little bit of steam in the market behind Vekic. Is that of any interest to you?
Not really. So let's kind of like break down, the losses in the last calendar year for Rybakina. She's lost 13 times in the last 52 weeks. And many of those came at the hands of the elite, right? The loss to Sabalenka in Madrid, understandable. And that was a competitive match. The loss to Iga in Doha, understandable, competitive match. Lost to Arena Sabalenka in Cancun, Pegula in Cancun. These are all understandable losses. There are some weird ones in the mix. Certainly the loss to Azarenka at Berlin, where she retired, was fitness related. The loss to Danielle Collins in Miami, I think, was largely related to the fact that Rybakina was just spending so much time on court in the run-up to the final. Like, she was going 3 when she didn't have to, and she was the more tired, and Danielle Collins was playing inspired tennis, and it is what it is. But there are two names on here that I want, or two specific results that I want to point to that are interesting. The first was in May at Roland Garros, where she lost to Jasmine Paolini 6-4, 6-2, 4-6, 6-4. And then the second was in Cincinnati last year on hard court, on a fast hard court, where she lost to Jasmine Paolini 4-6, 5-2, where she then retired. And I think I don't remember that retirement much, except that she had played so much tennis and really compressed end of the schedule in Montreal the week before. And so she was just out of gas. But the fact that Paolini has 2 wins against her is maybe you can talk yourself into that being a competitive match. The through line between a lot of these losses for Rybakina is that the match was on her racket and she just didn't have it that day. And because she has been barely tested to this point in the tournament, I just don't see it happening in the semis or the finals here. I'll cheer for Donovan Vekic against her. I'll cheer for Paolini against her, but I'm not going to, wager my hard-earned money against her.
Just looking through these Rybakina results, it's so jarring to see that Anna Blinkova Australian Open second round match where there's a 20 next to the 7-6. She lost 22-20 and saved like 10 match points or whatever. I still don't understand how she lost that and why she didn't make the final and play Sabalenka ultimately. But oh well, yeah. So that it's a little bit of a down. I mean, this happens on the women's side sometimes. Think of Ons Jabeur when she made the final the first time. She was playing, Marie Buskova in a quarterfinal and Tatiana Maria in a semifinal. And sometimes it does break that way. And it has broken as such for Rybakina, who beat Ons, of course, in that run. Let's jump to the men's side, which has produced a little bit more drama. I mean, the Medvedev-Sinner matchup was very memorable. Alcaraz has played some memorable matches for better or worse. Alcaraz is minus 350 to beat Daniil Medvedev, who's coming off his best ever win on grass, I suppose. And then Novak Djokovic has opened as a minus 550 favorite against Musetti, who is somehow in a Wimbledon semi-final, having dusted Taylor Fritz with an emphatic 5th set. Does anything leap out with either of these matches and prices?
Well, there's a lot to chew on for both of these, but we can get the easy one out of the way first, which is Djokovic should probably be north of 1,000. And I say that not because I disrespect Musetti. I mean, there's recent history between these two players. The best match that was contested the French Open was Musetti Djokovic. It happened in the middle of the night, and it was electric. The surface helped level the playing field, as well as the injury that Djokovic was dealing with. And I think Musetti, having come through playing 5 against Fritz today and now turning around and playing Friday against Djokovic, who had the day off, is not going to necessarily help Musetti at all. I think that the surface is clearly, the strength and the balance of power is on Djokovic's racket here. There may be some issues with the injury that crop their heads up at times. There may be some crowd stuff that happens, who knows, but ultimately I would be shocked if Djokovic doesn't win this in straights, considering the fact that Musetti has spent a phenomenally long time on court in the last couple of weeks, and Djokovic is relatively fresh and unscathed outside of the knee injury. So that one I think is pretty straightforward. The other one is interesting because, again, there's a lot of history between these two players. Alcaraz and Medvedev have played a number of times. In fact, they've 1-1 at Wimbledon, which is crazy that they've already played each other twice on this surface. The first win happened at a time before Alcaraz was anywhere close to his peak, and the second win, and that was Medvedev beating Alcaraz. And then the second matchup was last year in the semifinals, same stage, where Alcaraz just completely walked over Medvedev. Medvedev had very little chance in that particular match. Now, Medvedev is playing much better on grass this cycle than he did that year, but he still does have a relatively weak serve, which means that he's going to be under pressure on serve a lot in this Carlos Alcaraz match, and he's going to have to make hay on Alcaraz's serve if he expects to stay in, and that's going to make for an awesome live betting opportunity. Like, there are going to be way more breaks in this match than you typically see in a grass tennis match, and so I think realistically just trying to capture highs and lows of player performance and trying to get in when player gets broken and the market assumes, well, this set's over. Not so fast, because I do think that Medvedev's return has shown to be frustrating for Alcaraz. I would specifically circle the U.S. Open 2023, where Alcaraz was defending his title and was playing some of the best tennis of his life. He was coming off of the Wimbledon championship. He was 100% healthy, and Medvedev took that match to him, took him on strength on strength, and was absolutely phenomenal. It was a shock. I think the market was somewhat similar in terms of outright expected price, and so like saying that this an upset like this couldn't happen, I think is foolish. So I'm softly going to believe that Medvedev has something special up his sleeve for this matchup. He is slightly less weathered in terms of how much he has been tested this 2-week cycle. And in general, I think, Alcaraz, while he flipped the switch, and, maybe this is the right time to talk about it. And I don't know how much you saw of Alcaraz, Tommy Paul, but Tommy Paul had him down a set and a break, and Alcaraz flipped the switch. And the level of tennis that he produced from that point to the final point of the match was impossibly good. Like, it didn't matter who was on the other side of the court. Peak Roger Federer, peak Pete Sampras. They were going to struggle with what Alcaraz was producing in terms of quality of play. Now, if that guy shows up, then Medvedev is cooked. But I have not seen him be able to reproduce that match over match for the duration of matches, which means I think he's going to have to be a little bit more measured. And I think this is going to go 4, if not 5 sets. I like the over, and I think really my approach is take the dog going into this and look for opportunities to trade in prices as you have sort of the ups and downs.
What do you think the price will be, Alcaraz Djokovic, if that's the final?
Oh my goodness. Such a tough question. I think it's going to be Djokovic minus 120.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
Well, Alcaraz might be. I mean, the market right now is implying that Alcaraz will be the favorite, given that he's the favorite in the outright market and longer in the semi. But obviously that has room to move around. You expect that his match against Medvedev should, in theory, go longer than Djokovic's against Musetti, and Alcaraz has just played more tennis than Djokovic. Djokovic helped by not having to play a quarterfinal, certainly. So, yeah, we'll see. I mean, that is certainly the most interesting potential final, particularly after what happened last year. The last one before we move on, how well did you think that Medvedev played against Sinner? Because I watched pretty much all of that one. I thought he definitely played well, but never felt like he was really in control of the match. And I understand it's a high standard to be held to be in control of a match against Yannick Sinner. But I felt like Sinner was probably, even with his health issue or whatever he's dealing with, that Sinner was still probably the better player. It's just that Medvedev just happened to win high leverage points. And to Medvedev's credit, he played, 2 blinders to hold serve the last 2 games to close it out with no nerves, no melt there at all. But I didn't think it was amazing from Medvedev.
No, I think it was more of Sinner not having it. And I guess as I hold up the matchups for Medvedev, Sinner to me is a worse matchup for him than Alcaraz. That may sound crazy, but like, so much of what Sinner and Medvedev are similar players, but Sinner can kind of in general, like he did at the Australian Open final, he can produce a higher quality in certain moments, and is just in general can't. I have never seen Medvedev, who is a very cerebral player, never really seen him solve Sinner's game. But I have seen him solve Alcaraz's game. And I don't really know what Alcaraz is doing right now in terms of, like, is he 100% fit? And he is just kind of taking the advice of his team and just being a little bit careful about how often he goes in, past 80, right? Past 80%. And he's specifically trying to learn to win matches without leaving it all on the court on every point, because that's how you kind of sustain a long career, as opposed to kind of putting yourself in difficulty from an injury standpoint. Like, that's kind of, it feels like that's the chapter that Alcaraz is in right now with his team. And if that's the case, and he, he's down 2-1 in this set and he has to flip a switch, like, believe me, like, I will have finger on button ready to bet Alcaraz, because the quality of tennis that he produces when he has had his back against the wall in this tournament has been impossibly high. That said, there are aspects of Medvedev's game I've never seen Alcaraz really solve. And I think that in the back of my head, that's going to make this an interesting match, if not open up the door for opportunity for the upset to happen.
Okay. Yeah. Alcaraz right now with his health, it kind of reminds me, it's like a less theatrical, more honorable version of whatever Luka Doncic was dealing with at the end of his kind of Western Conference Finals run into the finals, where it's like, for the most part, he looks fine and looks himself. And then there are times where it just seems to just lapse into not being at full capacity. But anyway, we will see how that goes. All right, before we get to NBA Defensive Player of the Year, the LPGA's top golfers head to France as the 4th major of their season tees off on the shores of Lake Geneva. Nelly Korda, Minjee Lee, and Celine Boutier headline the field at the Amundi Evian Championship Thursday through Sunday on Golf Channel and Peacock. All right, Defensive Player of the Year, market close to my heart. Victor Wembanyama is -250 to win the award. Rudy Gobert is +900. Bam Adebayo and Giannis are both 16-1. Jaren Jackson, Anthony Davis, 18-1. Evan Mobley and Chet Holmgren are next. Mobley 20-1, Holmgren 22-1, and then OG Anunoby is 25-1. I think there ends your list of realistic candidates, at least anyone who has more than a 2% chance to win. What do you make of this market?
Yeah. Disappointed in the opening price for Wemby, as I was hoping to be on the train this year, and it's not happening at -250. I'll tell you that much. I'm inclined to take some long shots in this market and hope that Wemby and the Spurs start out cold and then get Wemby at a better price in season, because I think -250 is unbettable. I was hoping it was going to be, I don't know, +100, +120, something like that. And I was going to get, just bang on the table, it should be -150. -250 is really, really unfavorable to bet into if you want Wemby. And I think expecting him to go wire to wire with this much expectation is now all of a sudden an interesting question if he can. And, the Spurs, as far as team defense go, might not be great. Like, they weren't great last year, even though they were amazing in the moments Wemby was on the floor, particularly towards the middle and the end of the season. It's still a team that has a lot to figure out. And I think the fact that you have, some specific players in this mix, like I look at Giannis at 16-1, and I look at Bam Adebayo at 16-1 as well. Like those, they're good enough that taking flyers at those prices, you're not really exposing yourself a ton, and you can create some equity as we get into the month of December, and presumably get a better price on Wemby then. Because I don't think the trajectory of what happens between now and this award being decided is it goes from -250 to -500 to -1,000 in the opening months of the season, and then never comes back. I think there will be a better time to buy than there is this moment. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I think so. I think -250 is just unbettable. I mean, I think there's a case that would be reasonable to be said that he should be minus money. Maybe if he was -110, I don't think that would be a reprehensible price. But I think the thing is obviously there is the health risk with the 65 game rule. Now he is shorter than -250 to get through the whole season. I'm not sure. He doesn't really have an injury history. And for someone his size, obviously there is a risk there. But at the same time, just the fluidity with which he moves, the fact that he's not carrying a ton of weight, and the fact that he hasn't really been hurt previously, that all adds up to suggest that he is not a massive injury risk relative to someone his size. So I don't know. I'd have to look more into it, but I imagine that he's -500, -600 to get to 65 games. And the Spurs, presumably they won't be pushing super hard, but whenever anyone is in the mix for an award, they play the games towards the end of the season. It's not like Wemby's going to get to 60 games and then just not play the last 5 games and miss out on Defensive Player of the Year or whatever. So he's very likely to be eligible. It's just that the team is fairly unlikely to be, I think, the number one defense, which has been the most powerful thing in this award. I do think what helps Wemby the most, and why I think that he is by far the most likely player to win, I think the favorites for the number one defense, I would say your 3 favorites are Oklahoma City, Boston, and Minnesota. Mm-hmm. And I don't think any of those teams are going to have a candidate, because Oklahoma City, it's just too democratic in terms of candidates. There's Chet, obviously, who I think people have an extremely hard time voting over Wemby when everyone knows and thinks that Wemby is the better defensive player. Lou Dort, Alex Caruso, these guys, I don't think they're going to win Defensive Player of the Year. And then on the Celtics, again, they have no singular candidate unless Drew Holiday, I think he has some incredible season, but I don't really see that. And then with Minnesota, people are just going to be absolutely desperate not to vote for Rudy Gobert after what happened against Dallas. So I think that he is going to be held to an extremely unfair standard. And there is enough subjectivity in this award that there's a chance that he just can't win because people are just not going to vote for him unless they're an outlier, far and away number one defense, which I don't think they're going to be. And so you look further down the board, I always want to be on Bam because I think deep down everyone wants to vote for Bam, and he's got the rep and everything, and he is kind of a made man in that regard. But the issue is this Heat defense. I'm not sure they have a top 2 ceiling. They're just really small, and they give a lot of minutes to Tyler Hero and Duncan Robinson, and the second best defender on the team is maybe Jimmy Butler, who doesn't play that much. There is a path for Bam to win, absolutely, but I think that is a concern. And also just the fact that he plays center and he's 6'9" just hurts in your regular season in terms of having an infrastructure around him to be able to have a top 1, top 2 defense. And then to me, the 2 guys at price who I think are most interesting are Jaren Jackson at 18-1, just because I think the Grizzlies have a path to being the number 1 defense. And then the other one would be Anthony Davis at 18-1, just because he is a made man. And again, it's just hard to see the Lakers actually getting to a top 2-3 defense. But what do you think about Jaren and AD?
I saw Jaren's price and I was hoping it was going to be in the 25-1 range, and I would have made a case for it just because he is now going to be next to a big again, which is obviously was hugely hurtful for his ability to kind of be the roamer stat aggregator that he was his DPOY year. And So 18-1, not quite enough to get me interested. And I'm out on Anthony Davis just because I think the Lakers defense isn't going to be very good. But he is a made man. Bam is a made man. Like, these guys all have cases. They could all get shorter if Wemby drifts, which I think is really kind of the key question you have to ask yourself. Is that likely? Is it possible? And I think yes. Let me throw out just an absurd one for you. I don't even know if we have a number on this. I just want your opinion. As I look at my expected depth charts and my team ratings heading into next year, do you know who I think is highly likely to be a top 5 defense and is way off the radar? It is the Orlando Magic. They did some very nice things in terms of fortifying the front court from a defensive standpoint, and there is a lot of buzz among the intelligentsia in the NBA community about Jonathan Isaacs being potentially the best defensive basketball player there is. Now, I do not know if he'll get enough minutes. I do not know if he'll ultimately be able to kind of be part of a starting closing 5 with Suggs, KCP, Wagner, and Banchero. But if he is, like, he's going to be in the mix because his defense is undeniably impossibly good. And I think if you can track down like 100-1 or something just truly insane on that, then I kind of am inclined to put some of that in pocket just in case, because I just can't count how many smart people who have votes or have had votes in the past I've heard say on podcasts, well, Jonathan Isaac, he's one of the best, if not the best defensive player in basketball, if he could just stay on the court, or if he could just have a role, right? And it kind of looks to me like the Magic might have an elite defensive team this upcoming season. And I don't exactly know how he fits into the puzzle, but as an unrestricted free agent and relatively healthy, excuse me, not as an unrestricted free agent, excuse me, as a foundational piece with the Magic as he's currently currently contracted and in his prime, like, he seems like the kind of guy who could take a step forward even beyond what has been a superlative defense we've seen from him to this point.
Yeah, no, I don't mind that just because he is unorthodox. And I mean, to your point, I think I've heard Stan Van Gundy say on a broadcast that Isaac is the best defensive player in the league. Zach Lowe has said it on his podcast. So perhaps per minute, Isaac is right there with anyone. Isaac led everyone in the NBA in defensive EPM. I think there is a case that, on a per minute basis, that he could be the most deserving. It's just that he hasn't played more than 16 minutes per game since 2020. And the other issue, too, is that I think he can only, they're just definitely going to start Suggs, KCP, Franz, and Paolo. So he has to be the starting center.
Right.
So that would be the concern. Can he rebound enough? And do they want him to be the starting center, or do they want to, have that be, Wendell Carter Jr. and just bring Isaac off the bench? Because Isaac, he can't win if he's not starting, I think. So that would be the thing. But no, certainly he's the type of candidate to look outside the box for. I agree with that. Last one before we move on. OG Anunoby, I think, would have come second in this award had he been healthy enough to end the season. We'll see. The Wemby thing was weird. I think that he would have actually beaten Wemby and come second if he'd stayed, and the on-off stuff was insane, and the Knicks surged to the 2 seed by the end. I think with this market, the whole thing is that I think that Wemby is likely only going to lose if there is a compelling candidate on a number 1 defense. And I think that the guys who would be compelling, if Jaren Jackson is on the number 1 defense, that will be tough for Wemby to beat. If the New York Knicks are a 1 seed with the number 1 defense and Anunoby is the face of that, then that could be difficult for Wemby to beat. But I think of all these kind of democratic defenses, like OKC, Boston, Minnesota isn't, but Gobert is poison in this market now. I think if one of those win, then it hands it to Wemby. It's just that there are other ways, you can just go south for Wemby. You could just have not as good of a year as everyone expects. The team's going to have a win total in the mid to high 30s. I imagine they're probably going to be a dog to make the playoffs, and they'll be a dog to be a top 5 defense. So can't just fully anoint him yet, even if he is, I think, the pretty clear favorite.
Yeah. We agree.
Okay, cool. Let's move on to the AFC South. But first, Travis Kelce and Patrick Mahomes go from hoisting the Lombardi Trophy to hitting the links So they compete at the American Century Championship, catch the star-studded field in Lake Tahoe this weekend on Peacock, Golf Channel, and NBC. It's the Dutch hang on for dear life after Harry Kane scored from a penalty that for mine should not have been given. But anyway, let's go to the AFC South. The Texans are even money to win the division back-to-back. The Jags are plus 275 after they were, like minus 160 to win the division last year. And really should have if Trevor Lawrence and Calvin Ridley had connected on that bomb at the end of the Titans game in week 18. The Colts had a chance to win the division too. Shockingly, they are plus 325 this season, and then the Titans are 9-1. Let's start with the Texans, who are, I guess, everyone's flavor of the month. They're 8-1 to win the AFC, 14-1 to win the Super Bowl. The over-under win total is 9.5, juiced over minus 200 to make the playoffs. Player markets that are of note. I mean, the most interesting one is CJ Stroud, who is 10-1 for MVP. So he's like the kind of joint third, fourth favorite in that second tier after Mahomes with Burrow and Josh Allen. And then D'Amico Ryans is 14-1 to win Coach of the Year. Is there anything compelling to you about the Texans?
Against Texans at price.
Okay.
Tough to say it out loud. This is a good team, super talented. This division is tough. There's going to be some growing pains with CJ Stroud in year 2. And I think that all of the momentum and expectation of what you're going to get from Stroud this year is informed by finishing hot. And I look at the balance of work for CJ Stroud last year, and I think like for a rookie, it was incredible. But for like you're expecting to kind of take a team and at least match what you did last year and go to round 2 of the playoffs and win your division, all that, like with a tougher schedule. Not sure it's going to happen for these guys. And I think this is a very weak case, surely. But just in general, the fact that the AFC South is so much better broadly is going to matter. And I think, the way that the schedule is sequenced is not especially favorable. They have a ton of really, really tough tests where they have been, set up to struggle, really. Like, and in particular, I look at the stretch of week 7 to week 11 for these guys, where they go at Green Bay, which is second of a back-to-back. Then they get Indy at home, at the Jets, where they were super, super against the wall last year against that defense. Like, could not solve that defense. And then Detroit, and then at Dallas. Now that's, to my money, like that is 4 out of 5 teams that are expected to make the playoffs, 5 teams that are very much in the mix, all in a row. And there's a lot of that in terms of as you look across the Houston Texans schedule. And I think the things that people are missing a bit about CJ Stroud and the Texans are the beginning portion of the season. They had a very soft schedule last year, and they were in very favorable game states, and that allowed them to kind of get by some of the facts that they had very injured offensive line, and the skill position group was still very young, and CJ Stroud was still learning the position, and and all that like didn't really have consequences for them just because of the sequencing and because of the game states they found themselves in. And I don't know that you can count on that 2 years in a row. So without, if we were in a vacuum and you were like, do you like this Texans team? Do you like this Texans roster? Emphatically, yes. Like, they look good. Like, this is like the foundation of a team that is going to be competitive in the AFC for years to come. They're going to be a problem for teams. But at price, 9.5 juiced to the over, minus 145. Like, okay, like we're that sure that they're going to win 10 games against this schedule. That's a tough one for me. And I think if you have to really kind of poke some holes, like, I have questions about the secondary outside of Stingley. I have some questions about how good their pass rush is going to be, even though they've made investments there. And I definitely still think that, while Bobby Slowick's kind of scheme, you can convince me, or at least make the case, I think convincingly, that Slowick's scheme is offensive line agnostic, it's still not a very good offensive line. And so the running game looks like it could be, not especially helpful in terms of complementary. And I think a lot of things are going to come down to, like, can CJ Stroud recreate magic at end of games, in close games against elite, tougher competition this year. And while in the end, like, he is a clear, obvious buy in the long run, I think that, just expecting it to happen this quickly in year 2, while there are still a lot of, learning to happen with this Texans team just has me inclined to bet no on some of these, these superlative prices. Like a playoff no for the Texans is plus 165. Like the AFC is crowded with good teams and good quarterbacks, and I like plus 165 looks like a bet to the no for me. And that is, again, saying this all with the clear eyes that I like this team, I like the staff, I like the coaching, I like the philosophy, and it's just a matter of price and how difficult their schedule is.
Yeah, no, I agree with all of that. I think the thing is that just going from the schedule they had last year to a first place schedule this year, that hurts. I think also, like with Stroud, who has been anointed, and he is incredible, but like last year he was 13th in PFF grade. He was 12th in EPA per play. He was 18th in completion percentage over expected. Like I think there is a bit of a narrative that like he played at a fringe MVP level. And he definitely had games like that, but he also lit up some really bad defenses and got, almost shut out by the Jets. And they lost to like the Panthers as well. One of the Panthers' 2 wins on the season. The teams that they beat last year, they beat the Jags, Steelers, Saints, Bucks, Bengals at Bengals. That was an impressive win where Stroud lit up their defense. Yep. Arizona, Denver, Tennessee, Indianapolis, and then Cleveland in the playoffs against my man Joe Flacco. And then they were 10-point dogs against Baltimore in the playoffs and got blown out. So now you project some just linear improvement from a relatively young team, but I don't think the defense is amazing. Don't think the offensive line is great either. So broadly, I'm with you, and there's nothing super appealing about betting the Texans in terms of positive things happening for them. The other thing too is just when you look at their schedule, like how many games do they project to be like 6.5-point favorites or better in? Like there's not many. Like it's a pretty tough schedule. Like, yeah, maybe home Tennessee, maybe at New England, but outside of that, like there are very few gimmies on the schedule. So that all works against them. The division favorite this year. Let's jump to last year's division favorite, the Jags, who are kind of now like Seahawks AFC, where it's just like this kind of blah team that set at 8.5 wins. Don't really see where the upside is unless Trevor Lawrence is going to, tap into some of that generational prospect equity and become an MVP candidate type of player. Their win total's 8.5. They're plus 120 to make the playoffs, 28-1 to win the AFC, 50-1 to win the Super Bowl. Lawrence is 30-1 to win MVP. I think that's the only real player market of note. I don't think Doug Peterson's going to win Coach of the Year at 30-1. Brian Thomas Jr. 30-1. O'Roy. I don't think Josh Hines-Allen is going to win Defensive Player of the Year necessarily. Do you see any upside in this team? And is there anything? Do you think that them going from like, obviously a lot has changed, but them going from like a minus 150 or so favorite to win the division last year to plus 275 this year, is that too steep of a change?
No, I think it's right.
Yeah.
And because let's talk about why there was a correction. Last year, they were the only team with an incumbent quarterback who was, coming off of a season where he made the playoffs, won a playoff game, and probably, and they were in a division with 3 expected rookie starters, right? Yeah. Like you could not have asked for a gift-wrapped division, and they still didn't manage to do it. And I think the questions about the Jaguars and really like how you price this team comes down to how do you treat the noisiness in the Trevor Lawrence data? Because that's kind of the key. If you are just like, it is what it is. He's underperformed. He's more like a middling quarterback, and he's Doug Peterson doesn't have anything that I would qualify as like very special in his arsenal as far as like vision from an offensive side of things. Then this is at best kind of a low ceiling middling offense, and that's not going to be good enough in a very, very challenging division. Now, if you take a deeper look into the Trevor Lawrence data from 2023 and beyond, there's a lot of bad luck in there. Like some phenomenally bad luck. Like some of his worst plays it's just like on an EPA basis last year where like a guy didn't realize it was a fumble. He thought it was an incomplete pass. The defender picks it up, runs it back for a touchdown. And you're like, he wears the consequence of all of that in his stats. And the drops were especially problematic for the Jaguars broadly last year. Fumbles were a problem. Not recovering fumbles was a problem. Like all of the sort of luck-based stuff that tends to regress really, really hurt his numbers last year, to the point where if you aggressively correct for that stuff, you can convince yourself that even with a middling kind of EPA number, he was still a top 10 guy. And it was just bad luck the Jaguars didn't make another playoff run. Okay. I think in general, if their schedule had been softer, and if the bad luck had begotten them a softer schedule, then I would be making the case that, oh baby, here comes a correction. Jaguars are going to do what everyone thought they were going to do last year, and they're going to run away with this division. But the division overall was better. I think every team got better, clearly, pretty obviously. And I think just the fact that you have you didn't quite get the schedule breaks that you were expecting is going to hurt them. They have a very, very tough opening stretch at Miami, Cleveland, at Buffalo, at Houston. If they come out of that any better than 2-2, that will be a huge victory for them, and that will set them up to win the division. But I don't see it happening very likely. And then right into an Indy game, and then then you head off to London. And I think because of the very difficult opening first 5 games for these guys, that London trip could be uncomfortable. If they're 1-4, they're 2-3, and they're heading on the road for 2 weeks to play Chicago and New England. like if you're winning those, that's going to be a great trip. Everybody's going to be in good spirit, coming home 7 and with 5-6 wins. If you're losing heading into that trip, then all of a sudden, like, the temperature starts getting turned up on everybody, because expectation is that this team is going to win and compete. And if it doesn't happen, then there's going to be some consequences. So I think it's a pretty incomplete roster. And I look at the schedule as somewhat of a fragile, a fragile situation with downside that can't be ignored. And the moving on from Calvin Ridley, I don't think will especially hurt them, because they backfill with Brian Thomas Jr., who's not like going to rip the light the world on fire, but they at least have now Davis, Thomas, and Kirk across their skill position groups, and Etienne obviously can continue to provide outstanding two-way action in the from the backfield. But so Trevor Lawrence should be successful. This offense should be competitive. Their offensive line should be healthier and better than it was last year, but they're also getting old all of a sudden, which kind of puts the spotlight directly on the defense. I thought some of the losses on the defensive side of the ball for the Jags are going to be meaningful, particularly in the secondary. This is a team that you are going to be able to throw on, which means that the Jags are going to have a tough time defending leads this year, in my opinion, despite the fact that a guy like Josh Hines-Allen could be very disruptive as far as stacks go. So they kind of fit the mold for me of a team that's going to be able to fight to stay in games. Comeback mode is going to be potential, but protecting leads is going to be a challenge unless they're up against a team that has a weak offensive line, in which case Allen's going to flex. And so, do they get to 9 wins? Probably. But any more than that, to me, looks like it's going to take a little bit of luck. And now if they regress, not just to the mean, but beyond it, because they're due some luck, then maybe we're talking about a different outcome here. But my mean expected wins for these guys is 8.5. So I have them as basically a 500 team.
Yeah, ultimately, I believe in Lawrence. I think that last year he mentioned the bad luck, the ridiculous Tank Bigsby play, that kind of stuff. But he was dealing with so many injuries last year,
Sure.
just an array of maladies that seem to just constantly afflict him. So I think that he is the guy from the year prior in 2022 when he was 9th in the league in EPA, 8th in completion percentage over expected, 11th in PFF grade. I think that's his range. I think that you would expect him to be around the 9th, 10th best quarterback in the league, just given what he's shown and the caveats about his health last year. It just doesn't seem like there is a ton of, where does the upside really come from outside of Lawrence vaulting into being not the 10th best quarterback, but the 4th best quarterback, and the offensive line being a little bit more competent. Because that's the other thing with Lawrence. Like, it was just a complete mess last year with the offensive line, but they screwed up so badly taking Trayvon Walker. Imagine if they had Aiden Hutchinson opposite Josh Hines-Allen, and you had two elite edge rushers. The whole defense looks completely different. And instead they got Trayvon Walker, who does like an okay job of stopping the run and then can't get a sack to save his life or pressure the quarterback. Anyway, let's move on to the team that I think is, for me at least, the most compelling from a betting perspective in this division, and that is the Colts, who have a win total that is identical to the Jags at 8.5. They're plus 155 to make the playoffs, 28-1 to win the AFC. They have, I think, some more interesting player award markets than the previous two teams that we talked about. Anthony Richardson is 35-1 to win MVP. My man Jonathan Taylor, 40-1 to win Offensive Player of the Year. Shane Steichen, 14-1 Coach of the Year. Leatu Latu is 5-1 and effectively a co-favorite to win D-Roy. What do you make of these guys? Because they are fairly high variance, just given that Anthony Richardson is so high variance.
Yeah, I think ultimately the schedule is softer for them than the two teams we've already talked about, because it's a third place schedule compared to a first or a second place schedule. And the sequencing is a little bit softer as well. They get 3 home games to start out against Houston, Chicago, and Pittsburgh. Their one road game is at Green Bay. Green Bay is coming back from Sao Paulo, so they actually have a little bit of a travel advantage going to Green Bay than Green Bay does coming home from Sao Paulo. But I think in general, this Colts team is living with a little bit of positive glow that I don't know is entirely warranted from last year. Some of what they were able to do, which you can either attribute it to Steichen is a genius. He's going to be a guy that's there for 10 years and, really is going to help reinvent offense. It's also possible though that they don't have enough talent. And some of the improvement you saw from the offensive line was a little bit, misattributed to just not really facing an especially tough schedule, as opposed to like all of a sudden some of these guys who were third round talents just got good at their jobs. And so I'm a little buyer beware on high upside expectation here from the Colts. When we were doing some offseason stuff, like I was really, really ready for this to be like the team that I was really going to make a strong case for. This is the bet. Like they've got the, advantages X, Y, and Z relative to their divisional opponents. And then we see the schedule. I made my numbers. I'm simming the season. I can really only get to 8 or 9 wins for these guys for the most part, because they have so many games that are coin flips. Like the entire middle of their season, from week 7 to almost the entire season. Like they're never really more than 4-point dogs. They're never more than what is the most that you would expect these guys to be favored? It's going to be like 3 points. I have a 3-point favorite for them, 3.5-point favorites for them when they're hosting Tennessee week 16. That's the high point, right? So every single game is going to come down to perfect execution and red zone execution and making your field goals and just kind of winning around the edges. And Shane Steichen is an analytically inclined guy, so maybe they can do that. But at the same time, like Anthony Richardson needs to stay healthy for it to happen. There's no guarantee of that. That is a very fragile situation. And I think what I was hoping to be, kind of a team to buy on has sort of cooled off in terms of expectation a bit. That said, if they do, kind of hit the high end and Anthony Richardson is some sort of monster dynamic force in the red zone, that could be the difference for this team. And, there could be a point in the season where, they're taking on Jacksonville week 5 on the road. And we're making a strong case that they should be a bet on in that game and for the foreseeable future in the AFC South, because, just that they could win a whole bunch of these coin flips in the middle of the season, which is going to dictate their season one way or the other.
Yeah, I think this is like the definition of a team where you don't want to bet minus 105 over 8.5 wins. You want to ride both the extreme upside and extreme downside, because I think that Anthony Richardson might be the single most variable player in the NFL, where if you told me that he is like a legitimate MVP candidate, I can buy that. If you tell me that he is dreadful, or that he just gets injured in week 2 because he's a high risk of that, and the Colts with Joe Flacco at quarterback go like 4-13, can absolutely see that as well. I just think that everyone is always coming into the season hunting for MVP long shots, because I think there's been kind of the disproportionate amount of them that have gotten home in the NFL in the past decade, where Mahomes was like 60-1 before the season. The first year he won it, Lamar Jackson was 60-1. I think Matt Ryan was like 45-1 the year that he won it. I think if there was like a long shot that it could come from the clouds, it would be someone like Anthony Richardson. I think he is, in a way, the most compelling, even though like 35-1. This is the issue, because those long shots got home. Like 5 years ago, Anthony Richardson would have been 85-1 in the market, and instead he's 35-1. But I just think that Nate Tice wrote a really good article that was like a serious deep dive into Anthony Richardson, and it just completely sold me on Richardson, at least his upside, because everyone knows that he is, one of the biggest athletic freaks to ever enter the league. But Tice's breakdown, I think, really shed light on how, like, he's not just an athlete out there. He does display some next level feel. And there is just, and in Steichen's offense, with a really good offensive line that they've rebuilt, with weapons, and with Jonathan Taylor in his backfield, like, there are, I think, some serious upside scenarios. The defense is fine. I wish they'd done something else at cornerback. Like, what are they? Yeah. I don't understand. Like, why are we going into the season with like Juju Brents as the number 1 outside corner again? But the defensive line is solid. Like, overall, it's not a terrible defensive unit. It should be kind of par. And the offense, I think, has upside. So the one bet I have made around this team is on Jonathan Taylor to win Offensive Player of the Year at 40-1. I just think, and we talked about this before, I just think this market should be extremely tethered to fantasy ADP, because this is a statistical offensive production award. And Taylor right now is the 4th running back going off the board. If you look at Taylor's performance last year, he was incredible in games that Braden Smith played, which makes sense because Braden Smith is their best tackle and an excellent run blocker. And he was dealing with some injuries as well. But I just think that if Taylor is able to stay healthy, and his career, famously, he like never missed a practice or anything his entire career, high school, college, pro, up until 2022, where he started to deal with some mainly fluky injuries, like his leg got bent, high ankle sprain, tore thumb ligaments. He's still 25 years old. I don't think that he is a massive, monstrous injury risk relative to the typical injury risk that running backs come with. So, like, we're a year and a half removed from Jonathan, or 2 years removed from Jonathan Taylor coming into the season as the number 1 running back in fantasy, and like 8-1 to win Offensive Player of the Year. And now with a better offensive line, he's 40-1. Like, I think there is upside with Taylor, even with Richardson's rushing threat. And also the other thing too is that if Jonathan Taylor wins Offensive Player of the Year in his career, I simply must be on that. Given I took 70-1 2022 down to 2021 down to the wire, and got it death when Carson Wentz couldn't win as a 16.5-point favorite in Jacksonville. But what do you think of Taylor at 40-1?
I will pull for you. I want it to happen. You are owed some karma in that market in particular. But I worry that Anthony Richardson is going to vulture like 20 touchdowns from him on the goal. So it's going to hurt when he gets tackled inside the 5 and Anthony Richardson gets the glory. Last kind of closing thought on the Colts, and like, this is why I'm struggling with them. Their schedule is backloaded in favorableness. Their last 5 games, they're going to be favored. Their last 3 road games, at New England, at the Denver Broncos, and at the Giants. Those are very winnable games against probably young, rookie, or inexperienced quarterbacks. Who knows what the Giants are going to be doing at that point in the season. So they're probably coming home with 5 wins, likely. And I look at the front half of their schedule, and you're getting Caleb Williams early on. That's nice. You're getting the Packers when they're coming back from Brazil. That's nice. If they can win the opener against the Texans, they're winning the South probably. That's kind of their entire season depends on how they start. And if they lose, then there's a chance that there's not as much enthusiasm in the market for these guys. We get about halfway through the season and people have kind of written them off as potential contenders when they have those 5 wins in the in the bank potentially coming down the home stretch, which is pretty exciting. So I think depending on how they play that opener against the Texans is going to really determine whether this is a team that wins their division or whether this is a team that we're banging on the table in the middle of the season to bet their win total over, or just to bet week in, week out, or to take some shots on some awards, because I do think they're going to close strong.
Yeah, it is a weird schedule where, to your point, like their hardest game all season is going to be like either at Houston or at the Jets, and their easiest game is going to be home Tennessee. And maybe by the time they go at New England, at Denver late in the season, those are layups as well. But yeah, it is very flat. And if Anthony Richardson goes from, like, I think your average expectation, you have to project Anthony Richardson as like a below average quarterback just because he hasn't shown it yet. But if all of a sudden he becomes like a quarterback who, moves the spread 4 or 5 points, which is unlikely, but within the realm of possibility, then all of these games all of a sudden take on a different complexion naturally. But anyway, they are a compelling team to me. Just like watching Shane Steichen as well.
Oh, I'll watch every Colts game, no question. No question.
All right, let's close out with the Tennessee Titans, who the longest shot in the division. They're plus 900. Their win total is 6.5, juiced under. Obviously, they have Brian Callahan coming in as their new head coach from Cincinnati. Will Levis has been handed the keys, for better or worse. He's 100-1 to win MVP. They're plus 400 to make the playoffs. Do you see any upside for the Titans?
I see upside as spoilers in any given week against a lot of teams that have playoff hopes. But I think, you just put together a full and unbiased, opinion of this roster, and there's too many holes to think that you're just going to be able to backfill that in year one of this regime with developing some surprises. The Titans offense last year was one of the worst in the NFL because the offensive line was the worst in the NFL. And they made more investment in that position in terms of drafting, as well as specifically going out and hiring a head coach who would bring his offensive line guru dad with him. And so expecting that unit in general is a lot more serviceable in under this regime is a fair assumption. And if you give Will Levis more time, he can probably do more damage downfield because he does have a very outstanding arm. And getting a guy like Calvin Ridley, who can, clearly can create space downfield, if not catch the ball every single time it's thrown to him. And Tyler Boyd, who's, is a perfect third banana. Like, that there are certainly there, you can squint and see something that might work if they can fix some of their major problems. But it's also, there is also some clear and obvious holes on this team. Like, I look mostly at the defensive side of the ball. I see, they swing away. They bring in L'Jarius Sneed. That should help improve their secondary, which was pretty poor last year. The tackling and the run stop was a significant problem for them last year. They haven't really addressed that necessarily. And, Jeffrey Simmons is a guy that I used to think of as sort of an elite anchor that you can build your defense around, but that is starting to wane with him kind of entering the, this phase of his career. So, there are a lot of questions about how overall the regime change is going to, manifest improvement for these guys. But it all really just kind of boils down to, can you turn this group of offensive linemen into, a competent pass blocking unit? And if that ends up being, a favorable answer to the good, then there's a lot of people who are going to be kind of disappointed. A lot of teams who are going to be disappointed when they saw Tennessee on their schedule and they assumed it was going to be a win. And now that's going to be either a dogfight or they're going to potentially take a loss. So they have, in my opinion, a meaningful opportunity to improve from a 4th place finish, but it's going to come down to how the offensive line, takes steps forward. I will say that their schedule is somewhat favorable in terms of travel and rest. Their only rest disadvantage that they get all year happens week 18 against the Texans. They have rest advantages in 5 games, although 4 of them are just single day advantages. And they do get a full week to prepare for the Colts, which helps level the playing field there. So, there's reason to be optimistic, I think, especially if you sat through what was a really tough watch last year with the Tennessee Titans. But I think, kind of being able to go toe for toe with some teams in your own division who are going to be able to score a lot of points on a given week against you is really kind of what it comes down to. And so, you could convince me that this is a team that gets most, if not all, of their wins out of division. And then when they're playing other AFC South opponents, they just get a little bit cooked in terms of the scoreboard.
Yeah, I think the roster is so weird. It's like a Madden franchise mode where it's like, yeah, let's just get L'Jarius Sneed because he's the top cornerback. Let's sign Calvin Ridley. It's the same thing with like having DeAndre Hopkins on the team. Like it's a roster of big names that doesn't really seem to fit. I think the offensive line should be better just with bringing in Lloyd Cushenberry, drafting JC Latham. Like it just can't really be any worse than it was last year. And the defense, like there's no real edge rush. I just don't think it's going to be a very good defense. But I think the thing with the Titans is I think the natural inclination is to think that Will Levis is very high variance because he's young and because he's got this cannon of an arm and he's got all these physical characteristics. I'm not sure he's actually that high variance. I'm not sure he has the highest ceiling with some of his deficiencies with pocket awareness and the way that he just tries to put on the cape a little bit too much in a way that Josh Allen can do, but perhaps Will Levis shouldn't do. And so I think that it will hinge largely on Levis and how much of his upside he can unlock. I think that, all the reports about Brian Callahan seem to be very positive relative to a new head coach coming in. So, if they make the playoff, like they're plus 400 to make the playoffs, does that reconcile with Callahan being 18-1 coach of the year? Natural reaction perhaps is to think that he should be shorter and that doesn't reconcile. But I think this is the type of thing where probably has to win the division to win coach of the year. Some places in the market are longer than the 9-1 price. So there might be a little bit of meat on the bone at 18-1, because if it does succeed, it's probably going to succeed in a way that makes Callahan look really good with a creative offense, with a young quarterback thriving. And they could just be the potential to be a fun, buzzy team. But there's not enough meat on the bone for me to really want to get involved at that price. So yeah, they're a strange team. I do think they have some upside just with the talent on the roster and the new head coach who might be really good, but they seem a clear number 4 in the division.
Yeah. And then there's no gimmies on their schedule either, right? Like they have a 4th place schedule. You should expect that there's going to be some matchups where you're clearly favored. They're going to be favored in one game right now, and it's hosting New England. Like that's not great. There are by the time we get there, they may be favored hosting the Vikings. If that's a JJ McCarthy squad, by the time we get there, they may be favored on the road at the Washington Commanders. It's tough to say exactly how that's going to break, but right now I have them favored in only the one game against the Patriots, and I am. But there's a lot of coin flips on this, and I have a median expectation that they get to 6 wins. So, like I said, there's potentially some teams out of division that think they may go get a win against the Titans that find themselves surprised. But ultimately, I don't know that they win enough to threaten for a playoff spot. And for those reasons, I'm out on Callahan Coach of the Year.
Yep. That's fair enough. All right, we are done. Don't forget to check out NBCsports.com for more information to help you with your wagers. Thanks to those watching on the NBC Sports YouTube channel. Please rate and subscribe if you're listening to us in podcast form. Also a reminder to find all your favorite NBC Sports shows on Amazon Music. Just head to amazon.com/NBC Sports. From Jay Croucher and Drew Dinsick. We'll see you next time.